Every now and then, the boys used to tell me I ought to get one Jim Blaine to tell me the stirring story of his grandfather's old ram. But they always added that I must not mention the matter unless Jim was drunk at the time. Just comfortably and sociably drunk. They kept this up until my curiosity was on the rack to hear the story. I got to haunting Blaine, but it was of no use. The boys always found fault with his condition. He was often moderately, but never satisfactorily drunk. I never watched a man's condition with such absorbing interest, such anxious solicitude. I never so pined to see a man uncompromisingly drunk before. At last, one evening I hurried to his cabin, for I learned that this time his situation was such that even the most fastidious could find no fault with it. He was tranquilly, serenely, symmetrically drunk. Not a hiccup to mar his voice, not a cloud upon his brain thick enough to obscure his memory. The dim light revealed the boys, sitting here and there on bunks, candle boxes, powder kegs, etc. They said, "Shh, don't speak. He's going to commence." I found a seat at once, and then Blaine said,
"I don't reckon them days will ever come again. I recall once when I was younger, spotting a shiny coin-like thing over in my pa's pasture to the other side of the fence. Well, I hopped right over it and stooped down to take a better notice of it. Not noticing that at the same moment, my grandfather's old ram was taking notice of my posterior. There never was a more bullier old ram than what he was. Grandfather fetched him from Illinois, from a man named Yates. Bill Yates, maybe you might remember him. His father was a deacon, a Baptist. Well, he was a rustler, too. A man would have to get up rather early to get the start on old Thankful Yates. It was him that put the Greens in to join in teams with my grandfather when he moved west. John Yates was probably the pick of the flock. He married himself a Ferguson, Sarah Ferguson. Good creature she was. One of the likeliest young heifers ever raised in old Stoddard County. Everybody said that knowed her. What, she could heft a barrel of flour as easy as I could float a flapjack. But spin? Don't mention it. Independent? Why, when Sire Hawkins came a-browsing around after her, she let him know for all his tin he wouldn't be allowed to trot in harness alongside of her. You see, Sire Hawkins was a... No, it wasn't Sire Hawkins after all. It was a galoot by the name of Filkins, that's it. I disremember his first name, but he was a stump. Come to prayer meeting drunk one night, hurraying for McKay, because he thought it was a primary. And old Deacon Ferguson up and scooted him through the window. and he lit on poor Miss Jefferson's head, poor old filly. She was a good soul. Had a glass eye that she used to lend to old Miss Wagner, who hadn't none to receive company with. It weren't big enough, and so when Miss Wagner weren't noticing, it would sometimes get twisted around in the socket and look up, or maybe to one side and every which other way, while her good eye would stare straight ahead as a spyglass. Grown folk didn't mind it, but it most often made the children cry, being so sort of scary. She tried stuffing it with raw cotton, but that wouldn't work somehow. The cotton would come loose and stick out and look all so kind of awful. The children couldn't stand it no way. She was always dropping it out and turning her old dead lamp back on the company, empty. But she couldn't tell it had fallen out, because she was blind on that side, you see. So someone would have to hunch her and say, "Your game eye has fetched out, Miss Wagner, dear." And then they'd all sit and watch while she jammed it back in again. Wrong side before is a general thing, and as green as a bird's egg. But wrong side before wasn't much different, you see, because her own eye was sky blue, and her glass eye was yellow on the front side, so no matter which way she moved it, it wouldn't match nohow. Sometimes when she got excited, her eye would take to a spinning and first be green and yellow, then green and yellow. Sort of like fireworks. Oh, Miss Wagner was considerable on the borrow, she was. When there was a quilting or a society meeting at her house, she would generally borrow Miss Higgins' wooden leg to stomp around on. It was considerable shorter than her other pin, but much she minded that. She said that she could not abide crutches when there was company because they was too slow. She said that when there was company and things had to be done, she'd rather get up, and hump herself. She was as bald as a jug, so she would borrow Miss Jacobs' wig. Miss Jacobs was the coffin peddler's wife. Oh, the ratty old buzzard he was, who used to go roosting around where there was sick people waiting for him. That old rip would sit there all day in the shade on a coffin he judged would fit the candidate. And if it was a slow customer or a bit uncertain, he'd fetch along his rations and a blanket and sleep in the coffin at nights. He was roosted out that way in frosty weather for 3 weeks once in front of old Robin's place, waiting for him. And for as much as 2 years after that, he went on speaking terms with the old man on account of his disappointing him. You see, Jacobs froze a foot and lost money, too, on account of Robin's taking a favorable turn and getting better. Well, the next time old Robins got sick, Jacobs tried to make things up with him and varnished up the same coffin and fetched it along. But old Robins was too many for him. He had him come in and appeared to be powerful weak. He bought that coffin for $10, which Jacobs was to give back to him, and 25 more besides, if he didn't like it after he tried it. And then old Robbins died. And at the funeral, he burst open the lid, raised up in his shroud, and told the parson to let up on the performances because he could not stand a coffin such as that. You see, Robbins had once had a trance before when he was young and took the chances of it happening again, calculating that if he made the return, it was money in his pocket. And if it misfired, it couldn't cost him a cent. And by George, he sued Jacobs for the rhino and got judgment. And he kept that coffin in his back parlor and said he could take his time now. It was always an aggravation to Jacobs the way that miserable thing had acted. Jacobs went back to Indiana pretty soon after. Wellsville. That's where the Hagedorns come from. Mighty fine family. Old Maryland stock. Old Squire Hagedorn could carry around more mixed liquor and cuss better than most any man I ever see. His second wife was the widow Billings. She that was Becky Martin. Her oldest daughter, Maria, married a missionary and died in grace. Ate up by the savages. They ate him too, poor fella. Biled him. It weren't their custom, that people say, but as they explained to friends of his and that went down to gather up his things, they had tried missionaries every which other way, and none of them ever seemed to do them any good. So it annoyed his relations to find out that that poor soul's life had been fooled away on account of some sort of derned experiment, so to speak. But mind you, nothing's ever really lost. Everything that people don't understand or know the reason of does good, if you only hold on to it and give it a fair shake. Providence, don't fire no blank cartridges, boys. That there missionary substance, unbeknownst to him, actually converted every last one of them heathens that took a chance on the barbecue. Nothing else ever fetched him over but that. Don't tell me it was an accident that he was biled. There's no such thing as accidents. My Uncle Lem was once leaning against a scaffold and sick or drunk or something, when an Irishman with a hod full of bricks fell on him from the 3rd story and broke the old man's back in 2 places. People said it was an accident. Not much accident there was about that. He didn't know why he was there, but he was there for a good object. If he hadn't been there, that Irishman would have been killed. No one can make me believe anything different than that. Uncle Lem's dog was there. Why didn't the Irishman fall on the dog? Because the dog would have seen him a-coming and stood from under. That's why the dog wasn't appointed. Yeah, you can't trust a dog to carry out the special providence. Mark my words, boys. It was a put-up thing. There's no accidents. Uncle Lem's dog. I wish you could have seen that dog, boys. He was a regular shepherd. Rather part bull and part shepherd. He belonged to Parson Hagar before Uncle Lem got him. Parson Hagar was of the Western Reserve Hagars. Prime family. His mother was Watson. His sister married a Wheeler. And they moved to Morgan County, where he got nipped by the machinery in a carpet factory and went through it under a quarter minute. The widow, she bought the entire piece of carpeting that his remains was wove into. And people come from 100 miles to attend that funeral. There was 14 yards in that piece. And she wouldn't let them roll him up, but had him stretched out so, full length. The church where they preached his funeral was middling small, so they had to let one end of the coffin stick out the window. They wouldn't bury him. They just planted one end of him in the ground and stood him up. Same as a monument. And they nailed a sign on it that said, "To the sacred memory of 14 yards of best 3-ply carpeting containing that was mortal, of William
Jim Blaine had been growing gradually drowsy and drowsier. His head nodded once, twice, 3 times, dropped peacefully upon his breast, and he fell tranquilly asleep. The tears were running down the boy's cheeks. They were suffocating with suppressed laughter, and had been from the start, though I had never noticed it. I perceived that I was sold. I learned then that Jim Blaine's peculiarity was that whenever he reached a certain stage of intoxication, no human power could keep him from setting out with impressive unction to tell about a wonderful adventure which he had once had with his grandfather's old ram. And the mention of the ram in the first sentence was as far as any man had ever heard him get concerning it. He always maundered off interminably from one thing to another, till his whiskey got the best of him and he fell asleep. What the thing was that happened to him and his grandfather's old ram is a dark mystery to this day, for nobody has ever yet found out.